What is up, Who Dat Nation? Welcome back to another edition of the Straight Up Saints podcast. We're going to talk about a penalty problem in New Orleans. Last night, the Saints did get the win, but they looked a little sloppy. Is that cause for concern? We'll look at the history of Dennis Allen-led teams. We're also going to talk about Jimmy Graham. His future obviously had a medical situation on Friday that was a little bit scary. And three players that I think the Saints can already cut that were considered guys that were a fringe roster spot. All that right here on the Straight Up Saints podcast.
You're listening to the Straight Up Saints podcast.
Once again, guys, welcome back inside the Straight Up Saints podcast. I'm ready to get right into it. I think when you look at the New Orleans Saints, and it's hard to say that they have a penalty problem, even though it's the second week of the preseason, I do think there is a trend starting to come into effect with Dennis Allen-led teams. And I know that it's just August, and this Saints team has a lot of potential and a lot of talent. I really do think this is a New Orleans Saints roster that can do a ton of great things this year, especially because they're in a weaker division. They're in a weaker conference. They have a lot of veteran talent that honestly is still on the cusp of doing something great. But all that can get brushed to the side. All that can get negated if this team is sloppy, if this team is highly penalized. And I want to look over the data from the last couple of seasons that Dennis Allen's been a head coach. And I also want to look at the first two preseason games because I do think there is a trend here. And it's not trying to say the season's over or panic, but whatever. It's just to sound the alarms to say, hey, if the Saints do have a flaw that is sticking out, it's this one. So let's talk about the penalty problem here in New Orleans. And the first thing I want to mention is going all the way to the start. DA in Oakland, first 2 years as a head coach. 2012, the Raiders were sixth in penalties. They gave up the sixth most penalties, 6.8 penalties per game. That was their average. So how'd they do the second year with DA? Because obviously that's not great, but you could say, okay, first year head coach, getting acclimated to that extra responsibility. Maybe that's what led to it. Well, the second year that DA was the head coach, the Raiders were fourth in penalties with an average of 7.3 per game. So sixth during his first year, fourth in his second year in terms of too many penalties. So how does this translate to the Saints? Well, DA's first year in New Orleans as the head coach, Saints were 12th with 99 total. I don't remember what my math doesn't serve me correct to do the numbers right now off the top of my head, but 99 total over the course of the season. That was 12th for New Orleans. And 12th is an improvement. It's a lot better than 6th. It's a lot better than 4th. Don't get me wrong. But Dennis Allen-led team so far, the data tells you top half of the league in penalties. That's a little concerning. So now his second year in New Orleans as the head coach, we've only had 2 preseason games, but here's the sample size. The first one against the Chiefs, 9 penalties for 81 yards. Not ideal, but you think to yourself, okay, let's kind of see how the Saints respond. And then you have them against the Chargers last night, 14 penalties for 141 yards. That's atrocious. Now, when you have 23 penalties for over 220 yards for the first 2 preseason games, that's cause for concern. And again, I don't think this is me to, for me to sit here and start saying the Saints are doomed or this is a trend that's going to kind of linger throughout the regular season. But I do think if you just look around and you pay attention to New Orleans, to Dennis Allen, this seems to be the flaw that his teams have. Not super disciplined. They'll say they got to clean it up, but they never really do. And that, for me, in an offseason where I've probably been more optimistic than just about any other Saints podcaster, media member, whatever, that concerns me. The penalties are a legitimate concern, and a lot of them are pre-snap penalties that shouldn't be happening, and they got to get cut out. They got to. For example, you can say the Saints had 2 offensive pass interferences from Bryan Edwards. Shouldn't happen. Cost them touchdowns. Fine. And I'll give them the pass and say, okay, Bryan Edwards probably isn't going to make the roster. I'll talk about him in a little bit. But the pre-snap penalties, that's a problem. That's a concern. A lot of them on the offensive side of the football, too, don't love that aspect. So if there is something that today, August 21st, us Saints fans are going to come up together, rally together, and be like, hey, they got to fix this one thing, it's the penalties in New Orleans because it's starting to seem like they do have a penalty problem. And more importantly, it seems like Dennis Allen has a penalty problem. And if he's going to have his best season as a coach, if he's going to take this team to playoffs, they got to do what he's been saying they're going to do for the last 2 years. clean it up. So we'll see if New Orleans can do that, but I'm definitely curious. And I see you guys obviously in the chat. Good morning to everyone here. Really appreciate you guys as always. We're going to switch it over to Jimmy Graham. What a wild, scary 2-hour news cycles, segment it was, where you find out Jimmy Graham's arrested. If initially you hear from TMZ on the suspicion of being under the influence of a controlled substance, wandering through traffic, those are scary things to hear. And a lot of people, especially Saints fans, when they heard that go, that does not sound like Jimmy Graham at all. That it just doesn't add up with the type of guy we know Jimmy Graham seems to be. And then the Saints come out and they put out their statement that Jimmy Graham had a medical episode. They believe he suffered a seizure. He's with the team, but that's what led to him kind of looking disoriented. And first off, that's a really scary situation, especially if you think about him dealing with that as he's out and about. Thankfully, the situation didn't end worse, if I'm being honest. So what's the latest on Jimmy Graham? Will we see him playing week 1? What's going on for his future with the Saints? I think we got to look at DA's words and then go from there. So Dennis Allen, after the game on Sunday night, said that Jimmy Graham's with the team. He's healthy, but he's going to have more tests done. In quotes, said he's a little shook up, and yet overall, he's doing okay. That's a win. Don't get me wrong. But it's way too early, I think, for us to say, oh, is Jimmy going to play week 1? What role will he have? And it is unfortunate because Jimmy, I really do think, looks great right now for his age at 36. I think he looks fresh. I think he's got his legs under him, which is good. You know, the joint practices, he was making a few plays here and there against the Chargers. I was like, okay, I see the vision for Jimmy Graham in the red zone. I see the vision for Jimmy Graham being able to do what the Saints wanted to do, why they had this reunion. But now I think that all kind of gets sidelined because at the end of the day, nothing matters more than his health. And if he did suffer a seizure and that did lead to this whole situation, you want to make sure that you kind of really, really decrease the odds of that happening again. Because thankfully, the first time around, granted, scary situation, Jimmy Graham was able to go get checked out at the hospital, able to get back to his team, able to get medical care. You got to make sure you're doing what's best for the player, not right now, but for the entire longevity of their career and their life after football. Because look, me more than probably the next guy is like, hey, I want to see Jimmy Graham scoring in the red zone, dunking on the goalpost. Who gives a crap about the 15-yard penalty that will be? But that means nothing at the end of the day because things are bigger than football and health is absolutely one of them. And I hope for Jimmy Graham's sake, he'll be fine. And I do think while I'm saying this too, the Saints are in a spot where they're not going to have to rush at tight end anyway. Juwan Johnson will be a damn good player for the Saints this year, just like he was last year, but maybe even better. So you got Juwan Johnson, you got Foster Moreau, you still got Taysom Hill, can do pretty much anything you want offensively besides play left tackle. So you'll be fine at tight end. Give Jimmy the time to rest, make sure you figure this out, and you go from there. But I think that New Orleans is doing the right approach here, and I really hope that this all works out. So from one thing to another, Jimmy Graham to 3 players I think the Saints can absolutely cut today if they like. And I'm going to start off with the obvious one. And I said this last week, and I got that right. So we'll see if I get it right this week. Last week, James Washington didn't have a single catch in the preseason. He just didn't look good. And I said the Saints can just cut him. I said that's the type of game when everyone else is making plays and you don't, and you're in a crowded wide receiver room, you're subject to getting released. It's the name of the game. It's the business. It's the way it runs. So I thought James Washington could get released. He does get released. Unfortunately for James Washington, he immediately got picked up by the Colts. So I'm happy for him in that regard. But that was a situation where you're not making plays, hard to stay by. I think the Saints now are in a similar boat with Bryan Edwards, who not only didn't make plays yesterday, the plays he made hurt his team. You want to go with a goose egg for receiving yards and receptions? That's one thing. To have that and to have 2 costly penalties where both penalties in the red zone cost your team a touchdown on both plays, I don't see how he makes the roster, but I also don't see how he makes it to Sunday night against the Texans. The Saints have a lot of wide receiver talent right now. Shaq Davis has stepped up. Keith Kirkwood stepped up last week. Kawan Baker's looked better. Obviously, A.T. Perry looks really good at times. Those 4 alone or something, you already know you're saving 3 roster spots for Michael Thomas, Chris Olave, and Rashid Shaheed. And you know that Traquan Smith's going to come back from his groin injury, and if he does, the Saints might just keep him anyway. So you might have 4 guys already vying for 1, maybe at best 2 spots. There's no room for Bryan Edwards, and there's no room for a guy who didn't make any plays but also had 2 costly penalties. So that's the first guy I would say believe can get cut, and the Saints may very well could do this in the coming days, maybe later today. And it's a shame because I think for me, I thought the idea of signing Bryan Edwards was really fun, right? Knows Derek Carr, can get downfield, but he hasn't done anything. He really hasn't done anything yet. There hasn't been that pop in practice, but there hasn't been that pop in the preseason either. So Bryan Edwards, that's candidate number 1 that can go. Candidate number 2 that can go. I gotta go Anthony Johnson, the DB. I know there's a lot of preseason and camp buzz from him, and camp buzz, I never think it's unwarranted. I just think some guys play better in practice than they do in the games, and unfortunately for Anthony Johnson, he's not making plays right now. During the games, at least, that is. You look around, we've seen plays from Lonnie Johnson. We've seen plays from Ugo Amadi. We've seen plays in special teams from Jordan Howden, the rookie out of Minnesota. So I'm looking around, and I'm waiting for Anthony Johnson to make his mark, and I just don't think it's happening. So for me, I think he's another guy. If the Saints want to release today, Saints want to release in the coming week, I hate to say it, I'm not advocating for guys to lose their job, but the tough decisions got to be made regardless, and I think guys like him are no longer going to be considered tough decisions. So that is number 2. And number 3, and some Saints fans may not like it, but it's just the truth of the matter. Lucas Kroll will not be making the 53-man roster. And honestly, I think the Saints have seen enough from Lucas Kroll to know that it's just not going to happen. The guy's got a badass nickname. The guy looks like he can mess you up any place, anytime, anywhere. But 2 costly drops yesterday. One that he's got to come down with in the end zone. Another one that he's just got to rip the ball away from the DB. He can't be losing that. And it's a shame because he started off the day with a really, really nice catch. And I think there is that kind of slight optimism that you're wondering, what if Lucas Kroll does hit his potential? And that sounds fun, but he hasn't done it yet. I don't know if it's going to happen for him, unfortunately. And I think for New Orleans, you already have tight ends, like I said. If Jimmy Graham's okay, you have Juwan Johnson, Foster Moreau, Jimmy Graham, Taysom Hill. Where's the room for Lucas Kroll anyway? I don't see it. So I think New Orleans, not the easiest decision in the world, obviously, but it's a necessary one that will come whether it's today or whether it is before the regular season starts. Lucas Kroll will be released, and he will not make this 53-man roster. And I think yesterday there were a lot of opportunities for him to shine, just didn't do enough. Didn't do terribly. I want to make that clear. I didn't think Lucas Kroll was atrocious. He just didn't make the most of all his opportunities. And sometimes it's as simple as that between making the roster and not making the roster. So Bryan Edwards, Anthony Johnson, Lucas Kroll, those 3 don't believe they're making the roster. And I honestly think that they could get released as early as today, tomorrow, whenever. And I don't think it would be too soon for the Saints to do that. Now, I think they'll keep Lucas Kroll for the final preseason game as they should because you need those tight ends anyway. And if you don't want to play Juwan, you don't want to play Foster, you don't want to play Jimmy, that's a really got a good opportunity for Lucas Kroll, whether it's practice squad based, whether it's somewhere else to shine. But Bryan Edwards, you know what he is in the NFL. He can go. I just truly feel that way. Anthony Johnson, again, you keep him for the final preseason game, but he would need to ball out and it would need to be a technically sound game. And I just don't know if it's there. And again, we're talking about a guy that on a 4th and 23 was pretty much ball watching. That cannot happen. Saints need better. So those would be the 3 that I'd say New Orleans can move on from. So without further ado, let's get into whatever comments you guys have this Monday morning, and we'll go from there. So let's start off with DJ saying a win is a win, but can't be having sloppy pre-snap penalties during the regular season. That 1,000% has to be addressed. Yep. Look, the Saints are too talented to have 14 penalties for 141 yards, and I know it's the preseason. I know it's from a lot of guys that aren't going to play on Sunday. I understand that. But I do think that there is that element of you can't use that excuse when the Chargers backups are in, and the Chargers only have, I believe, 5 penalties for like 26 yards. So if the Chargers had minimal amount of penalties and penalty yardage with their backups, why do the Saints backups have pretty much a CVS list of receipts? So that's the way I see it. And again, I'm not trying to be a Debbie Downer. I just think like Jerry says, penalties really hurt the Saints on Sunday night. Jerry adds, man, screw TMZ. It's always something. F the media. Look, with TMZ, it's such a complicated battle because, they usually get things first, but it doesn't always mean it's right. And it doesn't always mean it's put the right way because there's always more to the story. So I'm always like, when something comes out with TMZ, I'll read it. I'll obviously get ready to start reporting on it. But then it's like, we got to wait for the other side of the story. And the Jimmy Graham one, for me, reading it, as I was reading it, I remember tweeting, I literally just tweeted and then that's it. Like just stopped didn't put a third word because it didn't make sense to me. It just, something wasn't adding up. And then we figured it out. Like realistically, with a good Juwan, et cetera, what kind of playing time is Graham looking at? I think he's more so looking at in the red zone, short yardage situations, like a 3rd and 2, maybe like a little throw to the flat, maybe, a slant for him, something simple. I think, look, the playbook shrinks right now for Jimmy Graham as opposed to, 2011, 2012, 2013, because back then, every play you can argue Jimmy can be your primary target. That's not the case anymore. And to your point, Juwan is the tight end one. Juwan is the best tight end on the team. And I think Juwan's going to be really, really good. So that's the way I look at that. But I still think Jimmy will have a role. I don't think the Saints signed him just for the reunion and shits and giggles. I think they do think that he can play a role in the red zone. And again, like he said, he's still 6'7", and he still likes to jump and get after the ball. And he's still athletic. So I think he'll be fine. Lucas Kroll, cut him. Yeah, I just think it's pretty simple. And again, it'll happen. Whether it's today or in 2 weeks, he'll be released. This is the truth of the matter. Nico and Jalen Smith have to make the team. I'll go with the last one. I'll go Jalen first. I think Jalen Smith will make the Saints. I think yesterday was a really promising debut in the preseason against the Chargers. A lot of energy, really good pass breakup, was laying the boom. And considering he's only been around the team for like less than 2 weeks, that was really impressive. So I like what I saw from Jalen Smith. Nico Lelos was phenomenal. 3 sacks, pass breakup, 5 tackles. He was really good all over the field. I can't say for certain, though, that he's going to make this roster, and it's not like me trying to minimize the performance he had. I just think he's in a situation right now with this team that at defensive end, I don't know who he would get the nod over because that it's Cam, that it's Tano, that it's Carl Granderson, Peyton Turner. Even though he has struggled mightily, Isaiah Foskey will make the roster. He's a second-round pick. So you got 5 off the bat right there. We'll see if he makes it. I think he played so well that he's in a position right now where in a week's time, if he has another game like that, I don't see how he doesn't make the roster. But I don't know for certain I could sit here today and say he would make it. Jalen Smith, though, like you mentioned, absolutely. Scared to think of Jimmy having seizures when he pilots helicopters. Yeah, that's another thing, too. Like, Jimmy lives a lifestyle that, like, is very fun, very adventurous. I just hope that it doesn't get compromised by the situation. Has Traquan's stint come to an end, Daryl says. I don't think so. I know Traquan is one of the more infuriating players the Saints have had in a long time because there's moments where he looks great and there's moments where he struggles and there's a lot of moments where he's hurt. But I do think that the Saints still value the blocking aspect. They value the downfield catching ability that he has. And I'm not saying I want them to keep Traquan. I just still feel like they will keep Traquan no matter how much the effectiveness of him is declining. No matter how many times he gets injured, it seems like he always finds a way to make the roster. Jerry says Brian Edwards go bye-bye. Yep, that's for sure. That I don't think that's a question. Foskey, if he continues like that, look, Foskey has not looked good. And the one saving grace for Foskey, 2 actually, is A, he's a rookie. That's the saving grace. But B, which is the more important one, the Saints have a history of drafting edge rushers who need time to develop. Cam Jordan had 1 sack his rookie year. Trey Hendrickson did not much his rookie year. Marcus Davenport took time to get going. Obviously, we saw once he was healthy, he got going, but it took him time. Peyton Turner, great example right now. I think Peyton Turner, if he stays healthy, is going to have a pretty solid year, maybe 6-7 sacks. But right now, if you look at his career as a whole, It's taken 2 years for us to get to that point to say, hey, I think Peyton Turner can be a playmaker. So let's have patience with Foskey, but let's also be fair and say, hey, he just hasn't produced right now. I think I read Jimmy Graham has been released. Not to my knowledge. Jimmy Graham still at the moment with New Orleans. He was released from, I believe, wherever jail he was taken to when he was arrested. That's when they talked about him being released, but he has not been released from the team. He's still on the team, and it doesn't sound like they're going to get rid of him. Nico and Jalen Smith have a spot on this roster. Nico 3 sacks yesterday, and Jalen Smith impact was noted. Jalen Smith impact, absolutely. Nico Lelos, outstanding. Fourth quarter, he just took over. Like I said, though, at pass rusher, they probably want to see a little bit more from him, but I think he's looked great, and I think that Nico Lelos has that high motor that you want. So I hope he makes the team, but we'll see what happens. The penalties really pissed me off every time. Totally agree with you. Judah says, do you realize you're making a fuss about players that's not even going to make the team? Well, look, like I said, that's the argument, right? The argument could be, Chris, just shut up. You're ranting about players getting penalties that aren't making the Saints roster. And I won't disagree with you there. Again, though, my argument would be the Saints played the Chargers backups yesterday, and the Chargers backups weren't as penalized. The Chargers backups, 5 penalties for 26 yards. So I agree with you. There are a lot of players I'm talking about today that will not be on the 53-man roster come September 10th. But I do think that being a sloppy team, being undisciplined, that's usually a sign of the coach, and that needs to get cleaned up. That's the only way I see it personally. Regarding penalties, we're remembering last year, it's one of the 3 strikes you're out on my card with play to not lose coaching. Hopefully Carr and the veterans will bypass, and injuries. Yep. Look, I do think there's that optimism there, right? That like hopefully with Derek Carr at quarterback, the Saints were 12th in penalties last year, which isn't ideal. But like I said, Dennis Allen was 6th and 4th in Oakland. So 12th is an improvement. Can the Saints just be like the 20th penalized team? The Saints don't need to be the most perfect team. And they're not going to be. And I understand that. And I've accepted that. But they need to be a little bit more disciplined. So give me like 18 to the 20 range, and I would take that. I absolutely would take that. What are the odds of Jake being QB2 over a confused Winston? I don't think yet. I will say this, though, and if anyone wants to disagree with me, that's fine. Jake Haener was better than Jameis Winston yesterday. It's just the truth. Jake Haener was decisive. Jake Haener was getting the ball out on time. Jake Haener wasn't really putting in his offensive line in a tough position. Because when we watched the first half, there was a lot of people that were talking about the offensive line and saying they're not blocking well and Jameis is getting killed. And yet the second half started, and no one was saying that anymore because Jake was playing within the structure. He was getting the ball out on time. And when you do that, your offensive line is going to do their job 9 times out of 10. Again, I think Jameis has all the talent in the world, but far too many times he leaves the pocket. He's too out on his feet, making plays that don't need to be made. Play within the structure sometimes. Jake did that. Do I think Jake is going to be QB2 this year? I do not. I still think it's going to be Winston. Do I think that Jake showed a lot of promise yesterday and was the better quarterback? Yeah, I also do. Edwards doesn't play special teams. Shaq Davis and Kirkwood could. Saints value players that can do multiple things. And also, Jontre Kirkland, maybe that's what you're talking about there. He's been great on special teams so far. Saints do value that, and I do agree with that. I actually think Jontre Kirkland should make the team at this rate because I don't like the idea of Rashid Shaheed being their kick returner. I like Rashid focusing at wide receiver and making plays there. And I think Jontre's been really good on special teams for the last 2 weeks. So I do agree. Like I said, there's multiple ways to make a roster. Bryan Edwards is not doing anything right now to make the roster. Timekeepers has not been perspective. 5th stringers, 5th stringer, guys who are playing elsewhere unless they pop. Yeah, they're usually playing for opportunities elsewhere, practice squad. And then there's that one guy that hopes to God that he just wrecks the game. And the Saints are like, all right, he'll get that last spot on the depth chart. But I agree with you. That's a very good point. For me, I don't think that there's any argument there. I just don't. And hopefully for a guy like Lelos, this game today is one that propels him to a roster spot somewhere. If it's not New Orleans, I wish the best for him, but I just don't know yet. I think it's too early to tell. 52 and 55 look slow and out of place. Debate me. I mean, there's nothing to debate there with you. I will say regarding 52, which is DeMarco Jackson, I think DeMarco Jackson will still make this roster, though, because I think the Saints like what they've seen from him in practice. And I think that DeMarco Jackson, when he is an off-ball linebacker, he's kind of adjusting to that second year. I still think the Saints are willing to be patient with him. As for 55, Isaiah Foskey, this is there's no debate there. Isaiah Foskey looks outclassed right now. Linemen get their hands on him, and that's it. He's not getting around them. He's not having that secondary move. So I'd love to debate you, but I agree with you. We didn't see a lot from DeMarco yesterday, and we haven't seen anything from Isaiah Foskey through 2 weeks of the preseason. So very good assessment. Thoughts on Kendre Miller? I thought he looked really good yesterday. 10 for 23. Is that great? No, but that's backup O-line. Fine. The 3 for 35 and a touchdown through the air is what I like. Using him on a wheel route, hell yeah. I said when he got drafted out of TCU, they didn't really use him as a pass catcher because he was so good as a runner. He was averaging 6.2 yards per carry, for his final season or something. So for Kendre Miller to get used in the passing game now the way he did, I think that's great. And I'm going to be honest, I think this rookie class outside of Isaiah Foskey has looked really good. I like Brzee has looked good when he's on the field. He came up with the fumble recovery yesterday. That's a big play. And again, he didn't force it. It was forced by Peyton Turner, but he fell on it. He's made plays in the passing game in terms of, pass breakups. He's got a very quick first move. I think he's going to be a playmaker from day one for the Saints. Sewell's looked good out there. I actually think Sewell, if we're saying which linebacker looked good yesterday, it was Sewell. It wasn't DeMarco Jackson. I thought Sewell looked really explosive yesterday. And that's another guy competing for a roster spot. Plays like that are definitely going to help the team. I was telling everyone about how much I thought Anthony Johnson would make the team, and then he pulled a Ken Crawley. Look, you weren't alone. Anthony Johnson was getting a lot of camp hype, and that was exciting. And he was playing well in practice. He just hasn't done it in the preseason games. Guys like Ugo Madi have played well in practice, and they play well in the game. Lonnie Johnson just had a really good game for the Saints yesterday. So there's too much, there's too many options in the DB room that if you're not making plays on those Sundays, I just don't see how you make the roster. Jameis just threw the ball up for grabs too much. Yeah. Look, I'm not trying to knock on Jameis, but that's the flaw, right? He will make the nicest throw you've ever seen. And then he is going to make a bunch of stupid plays that you just can't understand what he was thinking during that moment. So I hope that for us Saints fans' sake, we do get the full season of Derek Carr. We get to see what it's all about, get a good idea of what this offense will look like. But yeah, the problem for Jameis, it continues to come up. Do you see the Saints bring in another vet after cuts around the league? It's possible. Depends what position, but it absolutely is possible. Like, for example, if the Saints cut one of their kickers, whoever they say doesn't win the battle between Will Lutz and Blake Grupe, one of those guys will end up elsewhere. So for the Saints' perspective, is there an offensive lineman that gets cut? Is there a defensive end that gets cut? Is there a linebacker that gets cut elsewhere? And the Saints pick him up. So yeah, I could definitely see the Saints looking around and being like, okay, I think that we'll be able to do some bargain bin shopping to fill out the rest of our roster come September. Chris, this is a real question. How confident are we? Wait, this is a real question. Are we confident in cornerback if Lattimore or Debo goes down, I guess is what you're going to say. Are we confident? Yes, I still think we're confident because last year the Saints didn't have Lattimore for a full season. They also had a Debo missed time due to injury, and yet they were second in the league in fewest pass yards given up. That's a great sign. So I think for New Orleans, Lattimore obviously banged up right now with the knee, but it's not considered serious. Debo's been healthy. Alontae Taylor's been healthy. They're a year older now, a year wiser in Dennis Allen's system. I am confident. I still think they will get the job done. But I think the Saints absolutely need Lattimore to be what I think they can be, which is a team that is a viable option to compete in the NFC. But they need Lattimore. Not liking what I'm seeing from Foskey last week. He was giving up on plays, and this week D is having to yell at him to move with effort. Yeah, like I said, I'm surprised. I really liked the pick when it happened. I thought he'd be able to be a not week one, but a year one impact guy, and I'm not seeing right now. If he's struggling to beat off blockers at the third string and fourth string level, he's not going to make an impact for the Saints this year. Saints have to cut the guys that will make it to the practice squad and keep the ones that won't, i.e. Shaq, Lelos, Hayner, Isaac. Yeah, look, it's always like the catch-22 about making these type of decisions, you know? And I think for them, it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough because I think Shaq Davis will get picked up elsewhere at this rate. Lelos, we'll see. I mean, teams have got to be impressed with what he did yesterday. And that goes to this question, who's 54? That would be Nico Lelos. Jameis has a problem with holding the ball for too long and not picking up blitz as well, which was the issue even outside of the injuries. Yep, absolutely. And again, play within the structure. Play within the structure. It's got to come out quick. And that's the one thing that Sean got out of Jameis that the Saints couldn't last year. Got to get the ball out quick, man. Can't be holding on to it. I don't like the Groupie versus Lutz. One is too young, one is too old. I mean, I guess, look, and I'm not trying to compare because he is by far the best kicker I have seen in my lifetime. I mixed his name with the kicking position. Justin Tucker, and he's 33 years old. So Justin Tucker at 33, he's been great. So I don't want to say the too old thing for Will Lutz, who right now is 29. But I guess if you want to say in the moments, maybe you're not trusting them, fine. But I wouldn't go by the age thing. I think that the age for the Saints at kicker is fine. And I think Groupie, if he gets cut, he's going to be elsewhere anyway. Calm down. Jameis isn't starting. Nope, he won't. I understand the veteran experience in Roby, but I seriously think they should consider someone else in the slot DB this season. He hasn't looked good even going back to last season. I think that there's a reason they've been trying Alante in the slot during practice. I think they want to get younger and faster at the position, so I understand the concern. But I would be shocked if it's not Roby to start off the season. But the Saints have been trying with Alante Taylor, and the Saints have also been trying with getting Jordan Howard in snaps in training camp. So they're trying to get out there. I just don't think that right now they're ready to take that next step. I think that it'll still be Roby, and we'll see if Alante can take that next jump. Do you have any clues that our coaching staff has also improved so far? Clues? Let's see. I think DB-wise, maybe it's a fluke, right? But turnovers they're forcing now. They didn't force them last year. Maybe that's a difference. Remember, they brought in Joe Woods, no longer have Chris Richard. Maybe that's possible. But you won't know till the regular season starts because turnovers can always be a fluky type of thing, especially in the preseason. Offensively, I would say they're moving the ball with a lot more ease than they were last year. And again, just preseason. But I think that we're seeing, especially the first preseason game, Pete Carmichael spreading the ball out, making sure they have the quick hitters, utilizing the screen game again. Yesterday, they brought out the tight end screen for Lucas Kroll. So I think the Saints are starting to slowly but surely go back to things that worked out well for them. Why don't we try Dalton Risner? I'm confused. He's just sitting there. Leader, great player. Maybe he wants too much money. I think the last part is what you're looking for. I think Dalton Risner's in this spot where if you're him, you feel confident in your ability, someone's going to go down or preseason's going to finish and someone's going to say, holy crap, we cannot go into the regular season with this offensive line. And then he'll get paid more money. So that's the way I view it. Have you seen enough from Hayner yet that you'd be comfortable with him as the backup to Carr when Winston's gone? I'm actually, believe it or not, I might say yes because I think Jake, the one thing he did that I really liked was last week struggled, finished strong though. And I was like, okay, was that strong finish, does it carry over to the second preseason game? The answer was yes. That was encouraging. So I think for me, that showed a lot. And I love how quick he was getting rid of the football yesterday. A lot of quick passes. He really only had one that was an interceptable ball, I would say. So Jake looked sharp. He's taking those next steps. I do think he could be a backup in this league. Maybe he could be more. But for now, if we're just saying backup, yeah, I think he could be a backup. DA looks a little more comfortable coaching this year, far more engaged to me. Looks like the nerves of taking over are gone, and he's confident in both sides of football. We'll see, though. Yep, we will. It's going to come down to those Sundays. But he does seem a little bit more comfortable. I do agree. I see that. I definitely see that. Who do you think is the lead for RB4 between Merritt, Merriweather, and Williams? I don't know who is the lead, but I would say that Merriweather's looked the best. And this isn't playing favorites or anything. I just think he's done a good job receiving the ball out of the backfield. He hasn't had an awful lot of touches in terms of the run game, but he's been fine. 5 for 15s, whatever. But I think Darrell Williams is 8 for 17, so that's even worse. But again, receiving the ball out of the backfield last 2 weeks, he's done a good job. So I'm going to go with Merriweather. Love Jameis, but he isn't our quarterback anymore. For 3 years, I had to hear about him. Can we talk about something else? He's a career backup. Now let's move on. Yep, no, he is. And I think when the conversation to be had now is more so getting people to realize that and getting people to realize there's a reason the Saints went out and got Derek Carr. There's a reason they felt the need to pay for Derek Carr. And then they brought in Jake Haener, and Jake Haener probably will be their backup next year, not Jameis. So there's a reason they got to move on from certain things. Number 11 has got to go, caused too many penalties. Yep, that'd be Brian Edwards, and he will go, that's for sure. Kroll and Edwards were involved in too many missed opportunities. The drops were loud and crushing. They were. And I said this last night when we were doing our post-game live stream. The Saints should have blown out the Chargers. The only reason you don't get frustrated is because it's the preseason. It is the backups, but they should have blown out the Chargers yesterday. And instead, they needed a late-game interception to seal the deal. So that, for me, was a little discouraging. Now, if you guys have more comments, you can pull them up. But before that, we're just going to take a quick 30-second break to get to one of our sponsors of the show, DraftKings.
With the NFL season right around the corner, nonstop football action is in sight. You can get in on the action with DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 and score $200 in bonus bets instantly. Nobody's missing out on the action this season. All DraftKings customers can take advantage of 2 new offers every game day this September. Life's more fun when you're in on the action. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app before kickoff. Use code BOOT to get $200 in bonus bets instantly when you just bet $5 on any NFL bet. Only on DraftKings Sportsbook with code BOOT. The crown is yours.
Once again, thank you to DraftKings for being part of the program. And look, guys, this has been a fun first 2 weeks of the preseason. I think there's been more good than bad. I think there's reason to be optimistic about this Saints team. But I do think that there's still room to grow, and that'll happen. But anyway, if you guys have more comments, more concerns, more predictions, more thoughts, drop them in, and we'll get to them. I don't know if it was said yet, but someone I was really impressed with was Lonnie Johnson. I was very impressed with Lonnie Johnson yesterday. I thought he played well on special teams, had the game-stealing interception, and he's a guy that is competing, and that's why when I mentioned for Anthony Johnson, in terms of guys that can get cut, Anthony Johnson's not making plays. Lonnie Johnson was making plays yesterday, and it was in 2 phases of the game, defense and special teams. So, yeah, he absolutely was putting himself in a position to be on the 53. SoFi Stadium was leaking all game long. The tropical storm and earthquake was too much for Cam Jordan. I still, part of me can't believe they played the game yesterday, and the other part of me is like, that's the NFL. Like, they're all about the business. But that was crazy. Absolutely crazy. You know, people talking about them leaking, then you see all the talks about the earthquake and SoFi Stadium shaking. I just hope everyone's getting home safe. You know, that's where my head's at. But what a weird situation. And then you get an odd game, right? So many penalties, the 4th and 23, a couple turnovers here and there. Yesterday was a wild game, and it felt like it took 4 hours for the game to finish, even though it wasn't actually 4 hours. It was a little over 3, but an odd game. It just felt extended. Probably shouldn't have been played in the first place, but thankfully, Saints got out, unscathed. And I actually want to say that about the preseason so far. One of the beauties of the preseason so far is the Saints have somehow, I'm going to need a knock on wood, have gone through their first 2 games without any major injuries of the preseason. One problem from last season and seasons prior that I fear, especially with our schedule, is stopping mobile quarterbacks from hurting us. Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because if the Saints aren't going to stop mobile quarterbacks, they can be in a world of trouble this year. Bryce Young, mobile. You got the Texans with Stroud, somewhat mobile. Trevor Lawrence can move. Anthony Richardson, definition of mobile. Justin Fields, really, really, really mobile quarterback. I mean, we saw what he could do last year. Daniel Jones is a mobile quarterback. Desmond Ritter's got some wiggle to him. So, yeah, Saints are going to be better with that. Troy Pride has to go as well. He is not NFL quality in coverage. Yeah, and I think he will get released. And, like I said, it's one of those situations you can't practice well and then not perform in games. You got to do both. He hasn't done both. Other guys like Ugo Amadi, even Lonnie Johnson, they're doing both right now. Rookie question, but could Carr really give us that oomph in situations that needs balls, where Pete failed last year as a coach? Or are we still tied by the decision of that guy? I would say 2. I'd say 2 things for that. One, I think that Pete Carmichael will have more kind of conviction in those plays anyway, because he's coaching for his job. So that's going to be a factor. But 2, I think teams often are more aggressive when they trust their quarterback. I think the Saints are going to trust Derek Carr way more than they trusted Andy Dalton, way more than they trusted Jameis Winston, way more than they trusted Trevor Siemian, the guys that have played the last 2 years. So I do think that they will have more quote-unquote oomph going for it in those fourth down situations, being gutsy, having the balls to go for it. I do think they'll have that. I absolutely do. Who that to you, Chris? I'm late, but man, Shaq balled out. Can we stop the Bryan Edwards experiment now, please? Totally agree on both points. I thought Shaq Davis was incredible, and I thought that Bryan Edwards was awful. And one is vying for roster spot. The other one, Saints can release, see if he gets picked up elsewhere, honestly. Good morning from LSU Student Union. Good morning. Good morning to everyone out here in the live chat. Really appreciate you guys as always. About 8:42 here, Central Time. Do you think Shaq outplayed AT? If we're talking yesterday, yeah, he definitely did. But I'm not worried about AT Perry. I saw enough the first preseason game that I feel really good about what this kid could end up being. And yesterday, 3 for 22, had a pass that Jameis threw to him, was kind of like behind him, had to hit him in stride. That's another 15, 20 yards right there. Now we're looking at his stat line a little bit different. We're looking at his production different. But yesterday, yes, Shaq Davis absolutely outperformed him. I think a strong argument can be made, or not even strong argument can be made. I think it's just a fact. Shaq Davis was the best receiver for the Saints yesterday. Speaking of Carr, I can see his influence on Haener. It showed a lot last night. Haener looked confident. He looked like all the mistakes that were made the first game, forgot all about him. And that's what you need. Sometimes you need short-term memory, especially at the quarterback position. Hyped about the season opener. I can't wait. I cannot wait. I'm so excited. I think it's going to be a tough matchup. Tennessee's a well-coached team. Tennessee's got some guys on the interior D-line. Like, if they don't stop Simmons, that's going to be trouble. And again, on the flip side, got to stop the run with Derrick Henry. Going to go up against a pretty solid receiver duo in Hopkins and Treylon Burks. Got to get after Ryan Tannehill. It's going to be a good game. It's going to be a good game for sure. Not saying the penalties are a big problem since it was a lot of second and third stringers. Yeah, look, I understand that, and I don't disagree entirely, but the Chargers had 5 penalties for 26 yards, and they had their second stringers in. So that's where I get a little concerned. But I understand if people don't want to get concerned right now because they're going to say it's a lot of guys that aren't going to play. But the Saints do, if you look at the history of DA, there have been penalties. There was no playmaker on the field last night besides Shaq and Miller. Offensively speaking, yeah. Shaq made plays downfield. Kendra Miller made plays in the pass game. And outside of that, it was a lot of moments here and there. You know, you had the screen pass to Lynn. Kirkland had some nice plays. You know, Kroll had some nice plays, but then he had the crucial drops. So I agree. Kendra Miller, Shaq Davis, they were the ones. I've never seen Lalos, I think his name. He was the one that played the stop the last 4 plays. Yeah, Nico Lalos stepped the hell up. He had the type of drive that put you on notice, not just for the Saints, but around the league. Shaq Davis reminded me of Callaway that's not being asked to be Michael Thomas. It could be it. Like, I think we were so hard on Callaway because, like, he balled out in the preseason and we're like, oh, man, I think the Saints found, a diamond in the rough. And then the season starts, you're like, okay, he's got to be your wide receiver 1 or your wide receiver 2. And he did not look good. Shaq Davis reminded me of a young Jimmy G. I mean, size-wise, this guy is huge. He's 6'5". I wonder if the Saints, like, kind of try to convert him to, like, a hybrid tight end. Now that you mention it. We've already seen them do it with Juwan Johnson. So maybe they go that route. What happened to Kiki QT? We won't make jokes this year. Yeah, he got waived. And I'm pretty sure he got picked up already. I'll bring it up now. He got waived. Yeah, so he's in Miami. Oh, Destroy Carnage put that in the chat too. Perfect. So, yeah, he's in Miami. He got waived pretty recently. I believe he was the one who got waived to make room for Jalen Smith. So, trade-off was good. Jalen Smith looked good yesterday. I don't think Kiki was ever making the roster anyway. So, it's a fair trade-off. Thoughts on Foskey possibly getting cut? No. Second-round pick. He'll make the roster, I think. But how concerning is this, like the way he's looked, that you guys are asking, can he get cut? Like, that's the sign of, boy, you got to start making plays. Because if you're not making plays right now and fans are already talking about, man, can this guy get cut? That is not great. Not great at all. Hopefully, preseason game 3, he shows us a little something. Jalen Smith making the team? Yep. I don't think there's a doubt there, honestly. I saw enough yesterday. I hope Carr is the answer. I see 12-5 or 11-6. What do you think? I'm in the 10-7, 11-6 ballpark if this team hits its potential. Now, if they play up to their standard, then yeah, I mean, 12-5 is the goal. But I think that right now, comfortably, I'll say 10-7, but I think they could be 11-6. Should have drafted Ojulari over Foskey. I see that on Twitter a lot, and I think that talk will only get louder if Foskey struggles. Did you notice Peyton Turner got that sack and didn't celebrate, just casually walked off the field? He's on a mission. First off, love that comment, Isaiah. Yeah, I think Peyton Turner is so out to prove that he can be a game changer. And Peyton Turner said it this year too. He even said, like, I'm in year 3. I've been hurt an awful lot. Like, it's go time. I have to step up. And he knows he's been injured, and injuries have been a big factor. I've always said this. I don't think Peyton Turner isn't skilled enough. I just think Peyton Turner's got shit luck with injuries. But now he's healthy, and he seems like he's going about his business very well. And it wasn't just a forced fumble. I mean, their left tackle couldn't hang with him at all. So this comment, kind of jumping off here, he deserves a lot of praise, a lot of recognition for putting out. Because I said he looked really good in practice, but I've said for other guys, you can look good in practice and it doesn't translate in the games. He's looking good in practice and it's translating in the games. And now I'm excited to see what he does in the regular season. No more Notre Dame players in the draft. We'll see. We'll see. I mean, at this rate, Saints fans might be done with them after Foskey, but we'll see what happens. I hope Carr plays a bit more last game. I kind of hope he plays at least a drive next game. And I said this on last night's broadcast. I don't like the idea of if he doesn't play, he goes about 3 weeks before he's back in live game reps, where if he gets one drive next week, even if it's just one drive, it feels like a tune-up. You're getting him back in Pete Carmichael's system, getting acclimated again. So I would like to see Derek Carr get one more go. But, it's neither here or there at the moment. I think Dennis Allen will probably announce it soon, though. As fans, we are too hard on young players because we still have a win-now mindset, which doesn't leave room for development, which leads us to trashing players unnecessarily. That is the downside of being a competitive football team. Like, look elsewhere, right? If the 49ers didn't have a stacked roster, they could be patient with Trey Lance. But they can't be patient with Trey Lance and see him develop and get extra reps because they're like, man, we got to win right now because our roster's really good. The Saints got to win right now, and they know that. So they can't sit here and wait for Isaiah Foskey. They pretty much got to play their guys who can contribute now. Peyton Turner, Carl Granderson, Cam Jordan, Tano Passanio. They got to play them, and they can't play Foskey right now because they can't afford to waste time. Still miss Hendrickson, man. Don't we all? Trey Hendrickson ended up being that guy where it's like, was it a fluke year or did he finally hit his ceiling? He hit his ceiling all right. He went from 6.5 sacks his first year to 13.5 his last year with the Saints to 14 in his first year with the Bengals to 8 in his second year with the Bengals. He balled out. I like the problem with Foskey is he just looks small. He looks small right now, and he looks like, because of that small factor, right? He looks like once the lineman gets his hands on him, the play's dead. Like, it's done for him. So that's where I get concerned, and we'll see. It's going to be up to him to make improvements. And the third preseason game is a perfect place for him to start, hopefully, making those improvements. But that would be the one guy, if we're looking at next week, we need to see something. We can't go into the regular season seeing nothing. I think the problem with Foskey is stifled, fear of not making the cut. He's not fully in. We've seen the tapes. Maybe. I think also the game speed and just playing against better talent too. Like, it takes time, These guys are in the NFL for a reason. Do we have any updates on Rashid's injury and timetable? Everyone's been saying he'll be ready for week 1. And week 2, the second point, week 1 is where he should be ready. The second point, in terms of update, haven't heard anything. He was, I think, out on the sidelines the last couple of days, which is usually a good sign in terms of feeling a little bit better. But he's not ready yet to contribute in terms of this week coming up. But we'll see. Maybe he does feel a little bit better. And then by 2 weeks from now, he gets his feet under him, and then he's ready for week 1. We also like to say we should have kept certain players that left in free agency, but I promise you, we wouldn't like that roster if we did. Money is tight. That's the problem with depth. The curse of drafting well is if they play well, you eventually got to pay them, and you can't pay everyone. So that's why you really got to take advantage when you have those rookie contracts, and why we look at the Saints 2017 and go, man, it felt like they missed a window. I heard no joint practice this week with the Texans. Yep, Texans have too many injuries, they said. Called it off. I have no problem with them calling it off because the Saints just had joint practice with the Chargers. Then they had the Chargers game. Then they would have had joint practice with the Texans in the Texans game. Like, I don't think they got to go that hard. I think they can pull it back and still do what they need to do in terms of preparation. Were you surprised Kendrick played since he got hurt last week? I was a little surprised that they did play him. You know, they said he was available, and I'm like, all right, that's great. That means he's not banged up badly. And then they played him, and I was kind of surprised, but you look great. What a 180, right? Last week, worried about him getting hurt. This week, plays great. So, arrow is pointing up for Kendrick Miller. Like, Davenport actually looked his size. He did. And Foskey does not look his size right now. It's kind of crazy. Davenport be on the field. You're like, all right, he's the biggest dude on the field right now. Foskey, he looks like another dude right now. Still has time, but looks like another dude. And hopefully for his case, I'm not saying that after the third preseason game, but if I'm still saying that after the third preseason game, then I would feel pretty sure that we won't be seeing a lot out of him come week 1, even week 10, this season. And maybe it will be just a full-on developmental year for a second-round pick, which is unfortunate because when you draft someone in the second round, you'd like to see them make plays. Will Shaheed handle the kickoff and punt returns, or does his elevated role at wide receiver 3 mean a guy like Lynn makes the roster? I don't know. Like, honestly, I think it should make someone else make the roster, whether it's him, whether it's Jontre Kirkland. But I have no idea. I don't like the idea of Rashid being wide receiver 3 and handling the kickoff and punt return duties. Like, guys get hurt on special teams an awful lot. I know it's hard to really see it watching the game, but I swear I've been seeing him constantly getting doubled. We're talking about Foskey. I'll go back and look. I usually rewatch the games on the day after, so I'll give you guys a better idea. But I'll pay attention to that. Thoughts on Jontre? I thought Jontre was great. Thought he was really great again, doing really well on special teams. I think he's going to be a tough cut. And I don't know if the Saints thought that he was going to be there. Thoughts on Brzee? Or you're talking about Brzee getting doubled? Yeah, Brzee's been great. I've seen enough from him personally. Wanted to ask last week, I know Shaheed was exciting, but as wide receiver 3, is it possible AT can take over with more outstanding performance this season? Not a knock on Shaheed, both just very fresh. This season, no. Eventually, maybe. I mean, we're talking about a 2-time first-team All-ACC wide receiver with over 1,000 yards in each of the last 2 seasons, with over 25 touchdowns at Wake Forest. So, yeah, I think he could, just not this year. If Smith plays well next week, we won't see Foster because we still have Bond and Werner and Davis. Possible. I actually would like to see Zach Bond be used more in terms of getting after the quarterback, but they haven't done it since his rookie year, and I just think that ship has kind of sailed. But for Foskey, man, we need to see more of him. And I think it's not just, guys like Bond next week is huge for making the roster. Guys like DeMarco Jackson. That's just how I see it. I think Traquan and AT split that wide receiver spot. I actually think they split that wide receiver 4 spot. I think Shaheed will be wide receiver 3. And I think that AT and Traquan will be the 4 and the 5 on the roster. That's just the way I see it right now. That can change because Shaq Davis has played well and Jontre's played well. But who knows, man? I like the burst and effort from Williams at running back. Would love to see more in passing game next week. I thought he bounced to the outside really well, and then it got called back from holding, and I was like, damn, like the one play that you see him make where you're like, that is why they brought him in here. Don't really see it. As for passing game, I do agree. I'd like to see him a little bit more. He did that in Kansas City very well. I think the Saints can utilize that part of his game a lot more, especially here with Darrell Williams and Alvin being out. You're going to need someone for 3 games to step up in the passing game. But it could be Kendrick Miller. I mean, where the man just ran a wheel route to perfection against the Chargers. So maybe it's Kendrick Miller. But anyway, guys, I really appreciate you as always leaving these comments here on Monday morning. It's been a fun hour about with you guys. I'll have more Saints content today throughout the week. And I'll make sure, like I said, I'm going to rewatch this Saints-Chargers game. Any observations I made, I'll put them in there. And then we'll go from there. If you had to name wide receiver 1 to 7 right now in order, what would I do? Okay, I'd go Olave, Michael Thomas, Rashid Shaheed. I'll go. This is tough because it's not what I think. I just think he'll make the roster. Traquan, A.T. Perry, Shaq Davis, Jontre Kirkland. Those would be the 7. Those would be the 7 that I think deserve to make this. 7 aren't making the roster. But those are the 7 that if 7 deserve to make it, those would be the ones that I would say. So that's how I view it. Interested to know why they bring in so many tight ends, but I guess it's due to performances like Kroll. Yep. And just camp bodies. You try to see, does someone have any They brought in Jesse James. Does he have any gas left in the tank? Like, this is a guy that used to be productive in Pittsburgh. That's why they do these things. You never know who's still got it, who can kind of rejuvenate their career. It's worth bringing in the camp bodies. But anyway, guys, thank you so much on this Monday morning for tuning in to the Straight Up Saints podcast. I really appreciate you guys coming in for this one, leaving your comments, predictions, concerns, thoughts, all that analysis. It makes it so much easier. I really appreciate it, guys. It's been a fun day. We'll have more content on Boot Crew Media's YouTube page, so make sure you subscribe for more. Next Sunday, we'll have a post-game live stream again. I'll be there for that. And then a Monday like this, another recap, kind of going through it and projecting towards the future. And that'll be exciting because we'll have roster cuts to talk about, and we'll go from there. But anyway, guys, enjoy your Monday. I hope you have a fantastic week, and we'll be back with more content here on the Straight Up Saints podcast, the destination for the Who Dat Nation. Have a great week, everyone.